All right, and I have my guest with me in studio, Vanand Degila, Head of Disaster Operations at the Kenya Red Cross. Thank you for making time. Jerotich Sei, Active Citizen, is here. Asante sana for making time. And Bramwell Simiyu, Chief Officer, Disaster and Risk Management, Nairobi County. Thank you so much for making time. And Patrick Analo, Acting County Secretary, Nairobi City County, and also Planning Expert. Thank you for making time. And Vanand, I'll start with you in this. What are the latest numbers according to Red Cross? Because the numbers keep changing.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me. The numbers have increased from what you announced. It's now 24,700 households which are affected, and 11,206 which are displaced as per today evening at 6 o'clock. Of course, the others, we have the people who are missing, some injured, and even some fatalities have been reported.
How many fatalities according to Red Cross?
As at now, we were at 35.
35 fatalities?
Yes, and we're still receiving reports from our teams there in the counties. And this, again, some of the missing, again, as the bodies are found, then we take the records accordingly. So, but this, again, is what is really coming up as a concern, because we are having more fatalities, but also we are seeing effects which can be avoided very easily. Okay. People are disregarding all the precaution messages. As you saw, we sent out 19 million SMSs in at least 23 counties. And these were meant to caution them against attempting to maybe walk through the waters. So, but we are seeing people driving through waters, walking through waters, and really exposing themselves to these kind of dangers.
Okay, we'll come to that in just a bit. But Jerotich, what do we seem to be getting wrong every time? Because we know this cycle. The floods come, then there is drought, but we seem to be caught flat-foot every single time.
Thanks, and it's good to see you again, Trevor. You know, one of the things for me in emergency response is the prevention, mitigation, and response. You see, prevention for me is about stopping things from happening that would create the kind of situation that we have now. For example, uncontrolled and illegal development. Mitigation would be about saying, you know, if we have potential burst banks, what are we supposed to do to prevent the banks from bursting and creating the kind of crisis that we have? But where we are now is response. And I think one of the things we keep getting wrong is we get to the point of response, and then we start jumping into action, and you see people knee-high. You look at public health emergencies, you look at people like the lady who just spoke, they're paying mortgages, they're losing their household effects, they're losing their livelihoods, cars submerged. So when we stay in the response mode, we are always chasing after a problem. And part of my advocacy around the need for planning in Nairobi is that we must be preventative, we must mitigate, and then in the event of an emergency, we respond. But when we're in this continuous response, so then when the floods go, it dries up, we will forget about all of this. We'll start complaining that there is no rain. And 2 years down the road, this will happen. We are in the reality of climate change. And my question, the citizens' question, is what is the county doing to prepare itself to respond, since we have neither prevented nor mitigated this particular crisis. And I know later on in the show we'll be able to speak a little bit more to the issues of unplanned development and the contribution to this flooding situation that we are seeing. But before I stop, just to really say I am so sorry as an active citizen to really extend my pole sana to those who are losing their livelihoods, those who have lost their lives, those who are injured. It is really a disaster, and we have to be able to empathize with those who are currently suffering and wish for the suffering to be brought down to the extent possible, but without forgetting that there's accountability and responsibility for keeping the citizens of Nairobi safe.
And Simiyu, talking of response, didn't you know that this was going to happen? Because we've seen very minimal interventions from the authorities like yourselves.
Well, thank you very much, Trevor. And just perhaps picking up from what Sei has just mentioned, indeed, as the county government of Nairobi, we take very seriously the full disaster management cycle. And we recognize that we need to focus on mitigation prevention before we even think about response. And you'll recall that what has happened over the past 1 year or so, our disaster management sector has been broken into two. We have two directorates. You have the disaster risk reduction, where we've focused more on the mitigation and prevention that my sisters talked about. We have devolved the disaster management officers to the sub-counties and to the wards. And their mandate really is to try and build community resistance.
Question is, what have you done now?
So what we've done in terms of...
is flooded even as we speak.
Well, as you know, our strategy is twofold. One is to look at the infrastructure interventions. So we are looking at unclogging and unblocking the drainage systems. You know that the Green Army has been working for the past few months just to be able to ensure that the water flow is moving. Number two, we are also working very closely with the national agencies for the other, the major roads, so that we ensure that from an infrastructure perspective, the water finds its pathway. We're also working very closely with the communities, particularly those that are living along the riparian lands, to ensure that, given the early warning systems that we have in place, we introduced, we're able to caution them whenever the rains are approaching and ask them to move to higher ground.
We'll talk about that intervention and whether it works in just a bit. But for now, let me bring in Analo. Analo, how many illegal buildings do we have in Nairobi?
Well, Trevor, thank you so much for having me on this show. I think, Trevor, before I respond to that question, I would want to say that floods, like any other disasters, happen in urban environments, and I think we are sad that we have to go through this again as a city. One of the challenges, of course, is illegal structures or informal settlements that have encroached on riparian reserve, and this is particularly in the informal settlements. You are aware about 60% of our city is informal, and most of these settlements have encroached on areas that are watershed. And I think we are talking of predominantly the Eastlands part of the city. We are talking of Korogosho. We are talking sections of Kibera informal settlements. And I think later on in the course of the discussion, I will be discussing urban resilience. How do we respond as a city? How do we build our capacity? This is a global environmental climate change issue within the urban context. Where this is bound to happen. Today is floods. Tomorrow is drought. Yeah, another day it could be earthquake and so on and so forth.